Taylor, I think, is also going to perform a song at some point. Is that correct? Do you feel like performing a song?
I do, about my anthem touch.
Perfect.
It has some of my favorite lyrics, and it is one of my favorite songs on the album.
When did you write this song? And what do you think about its relevance at the moment?
I wrote this song in 2014. I was 18. I wrote it in my college dorm. I think I wrote all the songs myself in the college dorm, but its relevance today, it's just funny how, everything works out, right? Because this album, to me, has always been kind of like a philosophical album, and since the pandemic started, I've been getting a lot more into theory, just reading about different thought processes and such, and it's all just linked up very well.
So returning to your song, Fear Machine, it connects to reading that you've done in the meantime. It connects to thoughts that you've had about the documentary. You referred to theory, to reading more during lockdown. Are there any particular texts that you think relate to the ideas, the issues that you're grappling with in this song?
I would say Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Nietzsche.
Yes, is pretty much littered throughout this album.
Yeah.
That is something I can go into the whole spiel about, so I won't, but yeah, that.
We could both talk about Nietzsche a lot, definitely. We're going to give everyone else the same experience that I had of witnessing the lyrics first.
I'll have you read it.
Okay, Fear Machine by Partition. I breathe in bone marrow just like oxygen, and thus the line and mitosis and Oedipus again. Break my heart, then buy it. Break my heart, then buy it. Spend all your money on me. We create the creator, fear ourselves. We create the creator, fear ourselves. This is a really important starting point, I think, in this conversation. What's the significance of that particular lyric for you? We create the creator, fear ourselves.
It's almost like God and religion or any sort of construct like that can be a scapegoat for our own imperfections in a way.
Right. It can be a scapegoat for our own imperfections.
By accepting the construct of God, we create our sins, but also absolve our sins in the same way.
The concept of God, presumably as like the father in the sky, the big daddy who will look after us and who will smite our enemies, who the bad ones, protect the goodies from the baddies. Hopefully, many people would deny that that is the idea of God that they have. Once it's kind of ridiculed in that way. So,
but whenever I say God, I mean like Christian pop culture, Jesus.
Yeah. So for the benefit of argument, before we offend everyone, we're for the time being just talking hypothetically about this very extreme picture of the big daddy in the sky who's going to smite our enemies for us because we're good and they're bad. Okay, so when that figure is invented, you said it's for two reasons. What are the two things that are happening when we invent that figure?
Sins, and it also absolves them.
Interesting. So we invent the whole idea of sin through the loop of this big daddy figure who's going to smite the sinners. It's all one big system. So we invent the God the Father who's going to agree with us that these people are bad. And if we do have a sense that, there's some commonality between me and this bad person, simultaneously this whole system absolves me of my sin, so long as I'm good. So long as I give myself over to this big daddy, then it's okay.
Which can kind of feed into the concept of fear itself, because, those bad people that people fear so much, they want to feel like there will be retribution, but they don't want to take it on themselves.
Again, in this extreme case where that particular loop is being used, clearly there's some lack of acceptance of the self going on. Okay,
Exactly.
so whether or not God exists, whether or not Christians actually do think of God in that way, the person in this extreme thought experiment who's inventing the Big Daddy so that we can smite and think badly of the sinners, and then even if we do recognize ourselves as somewhat sinful, then we're okay because we're on the Big Daddy side. That person, they're like a creature that has a pretty warped idea of what they are. A philosopher that I engage with in the book that helps with the framework is Spinoza, and for Spinoza, hope and fear are two sides of the same coin. If my subjective state is one of uncertainty about whether or not some coveted thing will be mine, then I will be fearful that it will not be mine, but I'll also be hopeful to some extent that it will be mine. And if we were to remove all hope, 100% no hope anymore, then there would also be no fear. These are like a package deal. If you feel the uncertainty, for Spinoza at least, if you feel...
that is true.
It's true. You think it's true?
Well, it's just kind of like, when you're walking around with no money, you're not scared to get robbed.
This is an idea that comes up...
even within, like, maybe a typical fear, like being afraid of like a noise you hear in the night, there's the hope that it is, no big deal. A benign noise. Right.
Yeah. So obviously, generally we like hope and we don't like fear. Most humans would associate hope as with good, that's a good thing, and fear is bad. The whole idea of there being positive and negative emotions assumes that some emotions are good to feel, some emotions are bad to feel. But hypothetically, let's imagine the individual who is quite different from the one who resorts to the loophole of the Big Daddy in the sky and everything that comes with that. This individual, that perhaps they're somewhat unusual, doesn't think that fear is bad, doesn't try to avoid feeling fear all the time. The concept of radical acceptance is key here, an owning of one's subjective state, and the recognition that these so-called negative emotions might have a positive role to play within the functioning of the organism that I am.
Oh, totally.
Yeah? Does that resonate? Does that make sense? Sorry?
The art comes from feeling like shit.
Right. So yes, exactly. So these negative emotions could be good in a number of ways. They could be positive insofar as they lead to creating a powerful song. Related to that, they could be positive insofar as they lead to some kind of self-knowledge. Related to that, they could be positive insofar as they free us, perhaps, from this mechanism. If we kind of befriend these negative emotions, then perhaps a moment comes when we become aware of how they are functioning otherwise, how people are projecting their fears onto others and creating these bad guys and so on. Maybe we'll be less caught up in that game than we would otherwise be. There's all kinds of ways in which befriending these negative emotions might be a good thing.
Right.
Another idea in the book related to the idea of the heart as an organ of perception is that the emotions themselves are cognitions. So for example, anger. If I feel vehement anger at someone who is, no doubt about it, oppressing someone, that anger is a form of knowledge. It is awareness that something is happening and a judgment about that thing as, for want of a better word, bad.
Yeah.
So the emotions themselves are not mindless bodily urges that have no reason to them and that just need to be thwarted. The emotions themselves are telling us something that it would benefit us to pay attention to. They're serving us.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Fear Machine. When I asked you online about the lyrics, my first question was, do certain forms of hope keep the fear machine regenerating itself, do you think? And then you brought up the fears instilled in believing in a Christian God. So everything that we've just been talking about. Fear machine relates to the way in which this specific emotion is recreated within the system that we've been reflecting on. Do you have anything to add on that?
That's the machine.
That's the machine. What exactly is the fear machine in one sentence?
It is taking on the burden of fear in hope for something else.
Mm-hmm. So the entity buys into this package for redemption, basically. Is that fair to say? To kind of exonerate itself, to feel apart from the sinful system. So they see a sinful reality, and the fear machine is constructed so that the person and the people, the society that constructs this fear machine, can feel at ease with itself, because otherwise it doesn't.
Exactly.
And in the end, there is no one left to fear.
I mean that in a picture of that these people as individuals are alone, and even when these people are alone because they deny the self, they feel truly alone because they don't even have themselves. They feel like they have no one.
Okay, yeah. So if we've been successful at disowning the sinner's over there, it's not me. We have perhaps disowned such a large part of ourself, the part that is relatable to this external, bad guy, that we feel disconnected, we feel lonely. We've succeeded, but at what price? We've isolated ourselves. We've denied so much of the human condition that maybe we should play a different game. The more I search for meaning, the less there is. Is that something
That's probably my favorite line in the whole album, maybe.
Yeah, it's a powerful lyric. What's the difference, if anything, between saying, the more I search for meaning, the less there is, and everything is meaningless? Those are two sentences which someone could assume mean the same thing.
There's hope in the more I search, because you're still searching, it's not finite.
If the more I search for meaning, the less there is it also true that the less I search for meaning, the more there is?
I could see that.
Because
if you accept reality for what it is, you're not necessarily thinking so hard about it, you find meaning in those social constructs.
We've just imagined this scenario where someone takes this endeavor to feel good to such an extreme that they disown so much of themselves, and then they succeed, but it's not a true victory. Now, the person who does the opposite and who doesn't invest in this particular meaning-making machine, this machine that creates and recreates certain emotions and certain characters, certain roles that it imposes on people. If we are able to refrain from doing that, do we then experience something that truly is meaning when we let go of this particular construct within which we generally try to find meaning? Do we encounter something deeper? That hypothesis or that possibility relates to the quotation from the documentary that you quoted already, which is from David Gruber, who died in 2020. the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something we make and could just as easily make differently. A big question is it the case that we're just arbitrarily choosing between different machines? Okay, so we've got the fear machine and we've got that particular loop and the emotions and the character types and the different ideas of human possibility that go with that particular system.
And the mitosis and Oedipus is its own cycle.
Yeah, and we could choose. Are we just choosing arbitrarily between different systems where they all have their different problems and good and bad don't really even mean anything anyway? Or is there something on some level less good about the system that we get trapped in that just fuels more and more fear? Hypothetically, if we do find ourselves in a situation where we're just becoming more and more alienated and more fearful and more scared of one another, then that doesn't seem good. You know, if we're going to say anything is good and bad, then that seems bad. Now, you know, someone could come along and say, well, Simon, good and bad are just constructs, but I would still want to stick to my intuition that surely we could do better than this. And I would want to own the better. And yes, this is an idea about what's good and bad. I like philosophically, you know, I might not be immediately ready with a defense of it, but I'm going to own that I do have some ideas about what's good and bad. I would prefer a reality where it's not as simplistic and disheartening as the one that I see us trapped in at the moment, where there is so much suspicion of each other and so much hatred and so much projection of badness on others. Oh no, not that again. I'd rather pretend that I didn't exist. Last words. Is that all there is? Is that all there is? Those are the last lyrics in the song. Oh no, not that again. What's going on there?
I preface that I cut those lyrics and put them on a different song now.
Oh, okay.
So when I play the song, they won't be on there. But they're still on the album.
When I encounter them in a different guise, I'll be, oh no, not those again. What is the that we are experiencing again, and that we would rather pretend not? What's going on here?
Just I'm beating myself up mentally, you know, and then just not wanting to think about it at all.
So there's an experience of being in a loop, being kind of trapped within the system, having a sense that there must be an alternative to this, but there doesn't seem to be an obvious or even perhaps possible escape from this loop. Here we are again. I'm getting familiar with this. Maybe I'm kind of less reactive to it now because it's just the same and the same. But we have the desire on some level of not wanting to exist because it's such an unpleasant experience to be experiencing this again. Sure. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, great. That's a funny kind of way to respond to recognizing this unpleasant existential predicament. But it is a great and important song. I think it might be time to witness the song. Yeah, time to rock out, please. Yeah.
We create the creator for ourselves.
Thank you. That's great. I like that it ends with this "no fear, nothing to fear." That's the lyrics now at the end? Yeah, is that right?
Correct.
And throughout most of the song, there's this undulation. So we're undulating. We're in this machine. It's working like clockwork. We'd prefer it not to be working like clockwork because it's not fun.
Right.
It's not good.
And it doesn't go out of certain parameters,
Right.
like note-wise.
So sonically, it stays within these parameters.
Right.
In the performance just then, you were playing with the tempo. Is that something that will happen in the full band version as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The whole album is super weird.
That's, for me, sonically, the fact that we have this combination of that undulation, everything is clockwork, it's within certain parameters, it's constrained, but then there is freedom to play with the tempo, at least. And then also there are some slight changes, and especially at the end, when there's no fear, nothing to fear, that has a different character. So do you have any reflections on any of those formal features of the song, stylistic features of the song, and how they relate to the ideas that we've been discussing?
I guess the verses are more projection of apathy. And then when I break my heart, then by it, I consider the bridge. And when you get to that point, it's more of a command.
It's interesting that within these parameters, there is room for these different types of statement, the command and the various other types of statement that you just referred to. What's going on there? As sonically we have the repetition, we have the sense of constraint, but then also there is a range of different types of statement.
I guess it's kind of like maybe the machine process that my mind goes through, where I have apathy and then I'm like, this is how people should be. And then at the end of it, I'm like, this is my assessment after, going through, a rainbow of emotions.
Yeah. Is that a cat?
It is. Want to say hi?
A cat cameo. What's the cat's name?
That's Dolly.
Nice.
She's a good girl.
Even animals get considered to be good or bad by the humans.
And animals are intrinsically good, right? Besides maybe some people feel like snakes.
And that's within that Christian framework, the snake is definitely bad, isn't it?
This is Harlan.
So there's Dolly, and so one last time, this one's
Harlan.
Harlan?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good name.
Oh, there are bad names and good names, I guess.
Yeah.
Good. We've got everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is interesting, case in point. So we're catching ourselves in the act of saying things are good and bad. The cat's good, the name is good. And to some extent, we see that there is something suspicious and limiting and unhealthy about the way in which good and bad function within this system.
Right.
But then at the same time...
black and white thinking in general is considered an unhealthy thought process, just in psychological standards.
Nietzsche and Spinoza both do keep on using the words good and bad. Nietzsche famously says, beyond good and evil is not beyond good and bad. If you'd like to continue chatting when you have your cigarette and your coffee.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about Nietzsche briefly, at least. Nietzsche needs to get a little shout out and a little cameo.
For sure. He's the first philosopher I got into, and then kind of abandoned him, and then I came back.
That's really interesting in relation to the prodigal son story. That's what that story is about. Absolutely. Abandoning and then coming back. So why did you abandon Nietzsche, and what has drawn you back to Nietzsche?
I used to conscribe to the definition of nihilism that people stereotypically use, where people are life is pointless.
Meaningless.
But
yeah.
If you actually read it, as I've gone back and read it, it's really positive.
For Nietzsche, nihilism is just the state of affairs that we face. We don't have true faith as a culture in the old idols. It's the twilight of the idols. We don't truly believe in the Christian God, as we talked about
God
before,
is dead.
the big daddy in the sky, in the way that people maybe did in the past. And
Right.
where does that leave us? If we don't truly have faith in that, then what do we have faith in?
Documentary kind of almost just shows history in a way to where it does seem like very hard to break out of those cycles. You know what I mean?
Very much. A Nietzsche book that's important in my book is The Birth of Tragedy, because the full title of The Birth of Tragedy is The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. So actually, yeah, let's look at a passage from that. In the Dionysian diatribe, man is incited to the greatest exaltation of all his symbolic faculties. Something never before experienced struggles for utterance, the annihilation of the veil of Maya, oneness of the soul, of the race, and of nature itself. So Nietzsche's associating Dionysus, who he'll then identify himself with throughout his career, to oneness. And he's suggesting that the Apollonian culture, which has carefully cultivated itself and can explain itself and can recreate itself, it's like the machine that just recreates itself. He equates that with the veil of Maya and appearances. Music goes beyond the appearances. Music disrupts the loop, the self-contained system. So it kind of relates, I think, to what's going on with your song. And music itself, according to Nietzsche, the Dionysian music, is the thing that breaks up this self-enclosed system. The music, for Nietzsche, is what comes along and disrupts that and is more real and related to oneness. What do you think about any of that?